3 separate detectives were spotted combing the underground waste tank behind Nancy Guthrie's property on February 8th. According to a retired police source, authorities were likely hunting for critical pieces of evidence that got deliberately flushed away. Some still desperately cling to the hope she breathes. Her daughter Savannah hinted at exactly that in a recent social media update, desperately begging the public for prayers. She refuses to let the possibility die. But another chilling reality is setting in. Investigators hit a brick. Wall tracking whoever snatched the elderly woman in the dark, not some remote desert trench. They stood in Nancy's own yard, surrounded by yellow tape and biohazard gear. Detectives moved with an agonizingly slow precision, a terrifying indicator that evidence suggested they were no longer looking for a living, breathing survivor. Nancy was 84, a beloved television host's mother who vanished without a trace, exactly 8 days ago. But the following detail will freeze your blood. An anonymous shadow suddenly demanded $6 million. So why tear apart a residential sewer? Because evidence suggested this was never an abduction. Crimson stains marked the tiles beneath a shattered lamp. Crucial prescription pills sat entirely abandoned on the kitchen counter, gathering dust for over a week, and then the extortion letter surfaced. Bypassing federal agents and the family, the sender used a tabloid website to demand $6 million in digital currency before a 12-hour deadline of 5 o'clock that evening. That deadline evaporated into total silence with one bizarre word attached that never belongs in a ransom: celebrate. Zero proof of life, no bargaining, no actual contact, just an empty digital wallet sitting at zero, while a desperate family screamed into the abyss. Retired crisis specialist Daniel O'Shea, an expert who wrestled hostages back from insurgents, has witnessed every terrifying abduction strategy known to man. He reviewed the timeline and delivered a truly paralyzing verdict. The author behind those messages never held Nancy. They never did. Welcome to an investigation that grows infinitely more twisted. Because if the financial demand was an illusion, where is this grandmother? If the supposed captor is a complete ghost, who took her? Gone for 8 brutal days without medication, devoid of a single heartbeat of proof, and nobody knew yet just how real the nightmare was. Why play this agonizing game? The facts are stark. Genuine abductors avoid celebrity gossip outlets. They do not compose flawless emails while leaving a bloody scene. They do not ignore $6 million. And authorities definitely do not scour underground tanks for living hostages. Murder investigators do. So what truly occurred in the dark when Nancy vanished? Who authored that digital extortion? And why stage a theatrical abduction if the grim reality was already rotting right beneath the soil? The forthcoming revelations will churn your stomach. A gentle woman simply evaporated from her personal sanctuary. A fake ransom, smokescreen, masking a crime so chillingly and relentlessly methodical that hardened professionals who routinely analyze serial killers and botch DNA cold cases are labeling it the most disturbing waking nightmare of an investigation. Soon, you will clearly realize why Nancy's ultimate fate is not the most terrifying element of this entire mystery. It is the monstrous secret someone is burying. Before we pull back the curtain, a warning. We are examining the traumatic vanishing of a vulnerable senior. These details will undoubtedly unsettle you. We treat her memory with dignity, yet the truth remains jagged. Welcome to True Crime Unfiltered. We prioritize evidence and fight for stolen voices. If this is your first time, please subscribe and hit alerts. The thread is unraveling in real time. You cannot afford to miss the next horrifying break. To our loyal advocates, thank you for demanding justice for those who disappear into the pitch-black night. We could not do this without you. Let us examine the facts. Nancy was an 84-year-old grandmother. For 8 agonizing days, she has been gone from her Tucson, Arizona residence, a peaceful street where neighbors always watched out for each other. Monsters are not supposed to hunt in places like this. But they did. Forensics whispered a narrative law enforcement was terrified to speak. Drops of red stained the interior, enough to signal violence. A security light lay shattered. Shards littered the pathway. Evidence suggested a frantic struggle. Yet the heavy front door lacked forced entry. That was the first mistake. The predator either held a key, or this gentle woman willingly opened her door. Her critical prescriptions remained untouched, just resting on the counter. A vulnerable 84-year-old simply cannot survive without these specific life-saving pills. Cardiac treatments and blood pressure regulators are not optional. She has been deprived of them for 8 relentless days. Then, the digital demand dropped. It completely bypassed her wealthy, desperate daughter Savannah, echoing a massive systemic failure in protocol. It hit a news station and a gossip site instead. Anonymous tip lines hiding an untraceable phantom. That was the first mistake. Why bypass the family, opting instead to broadcast your extortion demands directly to the press? $6 million in Bitcoin. They even supplied a highly specific digital destination. Send the funds, and beloved Mother Nancy comes home within 12 agonizing hours. The hard cutoff was 5 p.m. That hour crept past, leaving only suffocating silence. The digital ledger remains completely barren, publicly visible. Not a single cent moved, or at least nothing that any investigator can currently track. Here lies the second glaring anomaly. Real abductors establish a heartbeat first. A muffled voice recording, a terrified photograph, anything proving the perpetrators truly hold the precious life they claim, while the shattered relatives desperately beg for answers. Savannah practically begged on national television, promising to pay, seeking one tiny sign her mother survived. Absolute silence. That brings us to the third massive inconsistency. The physical threat lacked panic, flawless grammar, chillingly articulate. The polished syntax suggested a highly educated mind, completely contradicting the chaotic reality of a sudden, brutal abduction in the night. Then there was that deeply unsettling vocabulary choice. The extortion letter said, "Celebrate." Savannah echoed that exact phrase during her public broadcast. It felt profoundly wrong. Joy has no place in a crisis. You certainly do not rejoice while your mother is vanished. You never cheer while a life hangs perilously. Why would a grieving daughter and a faceless monster share such a bizarre, incredibly specific phrase? The feds and Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly maintained the illusion of a rescue. However, draining the septic tank on day 6 silently confirmed the horrific truth they already suspected. They weren't saving a life anymore. They recovered human remains. We must dissect this extortion letter, because evidence suggested this was where the lies unraveled. $6 million in cryptocurrency was the price. The routing destination was extremely exact. Pay the toll, and Nancy materializes safely within 12 short hours. The ultimatum was brutally strict. 5:00 sharp, cruelly reminding loved ones the clock was ticking. It wore the terrifying mask of a kidnapping threat, but beneath the surface, the dark logic shattered. First, the bizarre delivery route. The perpetrators used anonymous tip portals for the tabloids and local news. They bypassed encrypted emails, ignored direct phone calls, and avoided mailing the relatives. They weaponized an anonymous online public forum. Why did this detail terrify investigators? It completely scrubbed the digital crime scene, leaving zero internet protocol data and absolutely no traceable electronic breadcrumbs. Devastatingly, it severed any hope of dialogue. The broken relatives cannot respond. Haggling became impossible. Demanding answers was useless. Begging for a heartbeat went unheard. It completely handcuffed lead detectives. Real hostage takers crave the bargaining process. They rely on psychological warfare to establish proof, build a sick trust, and ultimately secure their lucrative payday. This specific document did the exact reverse. It was a sterile, isolated declaration shouted blindly. Secondly, the actual phrasing. It was chillingly pristine. Flawless syntax, zero typographical mistakes, absolutely no unhinged anger, and no violence. It felt meticulously drafted by a highly educated individual sitting with absolute, terrifyingly cold clarity. Now contrast that with the home's physical evidence. A shattered exterior light, a desperate fight for survival. Savage crimes never breed such calculated, poetic extortion demands. Real violence breeds careless errors and hyperventilation. This document lacked sweat. Thirdly, that bizarre linguistic echo. It anchored the extortionist's message. It slipped from Savannah's lips. Evidence suggested this wasn't accidental. The monster was either parroting the victim's phrasing as psychological warfare, or the author of that letter was sitting safely indoors. Fourth, the devastating systemic failure of involving tabloids. Why funnel a threat to the press? Criminals want shadows. Inviting an audience mathematically decreases the odds of escaping with cash. Tipping off the press summons the feds, microscopic attention, and crushing pressure. Unless the objective was never money, perhaps the true goal was simply manufacturing chaos. Fifth, the total absence of a pulse check. In human trafficking, this is always the ultimate glaring deal breaker. Confirming the captive breathes is industry standard. It proves monsters hold the leverage. It builds their terrifying credibility. It forces traumatized relatives to pay. Nancy's people sobbed for proof. Savannah waved the checkbook. Yet the clock just ran out in silence. Not a single whisper emerged. Seasoned crisis analysts cite the exact same conclusion. When an abductor refuses to prove their prey is breathing, they do not possess the prize. Nancy was either already a casualty, or this was a scam. According to former federal agent Ken Gray, the playbook was entirely wrong. This simply wasn't a factual abduction. So what exactly were we witnessing here? Unlocking that horrible mystery requires dragging in a professional who has stared into this darkness. Commander Daniel O'Shea spent decades pulling souls back from the brink as an elite negotiator. He bargained with Al-Qaeda. He held the line at the United States Embassy in Iraq. He stared down warlords, seasoned cartels, and the most lethal sociopaths walking today. When he reviewed the files on a mother named Nancy, his blood froze. The systemic anomalies were glaring. O'Shea traded lives in war zones, dissecting every cruel extortion tactic ever invented. But nobody knew yet. Every hostage playbook, every psychological lever predators pull to bleed families dry. He knew the signs, and this nightmare felt wrong. His expert verdict was chilling. This was never an actual kidnapping. Evidence suggested this was a sick grift or a frantic smokescreen for a finalized tragedy. That wasn't just idle guesswork. This came directly from a hardened specialist who sat in the shadows while human lives ticked away. The profiler developed two distinct theories explaining this bizarre mystery. Both were completely terrifying. Neither involved a traditional ransom grab. Both chilling scenarios pointed to one devastating reality. Nancy's fate was permanently sealed before that demand was mailed. The agent's first theory goes like this. The Phantom drafting those demands had absolutely nothing to do with taking Nancy. He labeled this suspect an interloper, a parasitic fraud hijacking a dark hour. The mechanics were disturbingly simple. A tragedy strikes. Nancy vanishes. Perhaps she was injured, or worse. The cameras finally arrive. It becomes a massive national spectacle. An anchor's mother vanishes from her quiet Arizona home. The media circus explodes. Some bottom feeder watches the broadcast and decides to cash in. They draft a bogus threat. They demand $6 million. They set up a secure crypto drop. The facade looked authentic. They just needed the grieving relatives, blinded by sheer terror, to wire the funds without asking questions. The digital extortionists never touched the victim. They were entirely clueless. Providing physical proof was impossible because they never held her captive. They were just weaponizing a daughter's profound trauma for a quick payout. It explained why the extortion leaked to a tabloid instead of the family. The grifter lacked their actual contacts. It justified the deafening silence when investigators demanded a voice recording. It clarified why the prose felt so uncharacteristically polished instead of raw and manic. The words were penned by a calculated fraudster. That was the first mistake. Assuming silence meant danger, when really, a scammer couldn't answer questions. It was a twisted game cops see constantly. National headlines draw vultures in. Prominent bloodlines and wealthy public figures are their prey. An opening appears, and a predator strikes. Phony demands and fabricated threats flood the zone, banking entirely on panic overriding logic. Should this profile hold up, Nancy's vanishing and the subsequent shakedown were completely unrelated phenomena. The real investigation had to pivot. Detectives needed to focus on who held the keys, knew her rhythm, and harbored motive. The demand was merely static, meant to disorient police. Yet the analyst harbored a secondary theory, and its implications were staggeringly bleak. The matriarch never actually made it out alive. Evidence suggested a chilling story. Drops of crimson stained the floorboards, near a smashed exterior light. But the most damning clue was the abandoned heart pills, a death sentence for an 84-year-old. 8 agonizing days passed. No secret calls, no proof, no bargaining. The expert made his assessment. The plot was a ghost story. Evidence suggested an intruder breached the perimeter that evening. Whether stranger or friend remained a mystery. The temperature shifted. A dispute triggered a violent struggle, and the frail victim suffered catastrophic injuries before the night even started. Suddenly, the attacker stared down a life sentence. A sloppy murder leaves trails. Detectives would soon swarm the property while news vans camped outside. With the clock ticking rapidly, they desperately needed a blinding diversion. Out came the fabricated extortion letter. They dressed the scene like a kidnapping, demanding $6 million while dangling false promises. A ticking clock was established. That 12-hour drop window signaled to detectives that the captive might be anywhere inside a 720-mile radius. But nobody knew the strategy yet. It bought the killer daylight. Task forces mobilized in wrong directions. Systemic failures often start with orchestrated chaos. It forced the family to beg at podiums while crucial evidence deteriorated. This wasn't a kidnapping for profit. It was a calculated delay, masking a gruesome, finalized reality. The pieces interlocked perfectly. It explained why the crypto account gathered dust with absolutely zero. It accounted for the deadlines expiring without consequence, and why a tabloid received the demands. The currency wasn't cash. The goal was public distraction. A professional wanting $6 million would keep negotiating. They would absolutely verify proof of life. They would meticulously guide shell-shocked relatives through payment protocols. Evading the FBI requires a flawless, airtight extraction plan. Every single standard protocol was missing. The ransom demand was entirely performative. Its sole purpose was hijacking the broadcast. Keep the nation obsessing over a phantom hostage, while the actual crime vanished forever. The profiler concluded the true objective was more sadistic than greed. It was psychological torture, watching the family suffer publicly, seeing an anchor, a woman who commands the room while interviewing presidents, breaking down on live television. That shattered image was the sickening payoff. The expert's final directive was brutally clear: do not pay the ransom. Sponsoring her killers would only validate the torture. But the relatives now stood on the edge of an utterly impossible, terrifying cliff. Clinging to a 1% chance Nancy still breathes, extortion suddenly feels like the only viable lifeline to bring her home. Denying the drop might slam the door on her survival. Cold logic screams to hold off. A shattered mother whispers, "What if?" This marks the sheer cruelty here. We need to dissect that 12-hour return window. It exposes a terrifyingly calculated, predatory mind. The extortion letters swore Nancy would be dropped safely within 12 hours post-transaction. On paper, it sounds standard. But do the math. 12 hours at highway velocity covers roughly 720 miles. That forms an immense radius. Imagine a sprawling circle with Tucson in the center. What lies inside? Los Angeles, San Diego, Las Vegas, southern Utah, southern Colorado, all of New Mexico, and northern Mexico. It paints a massive search grid spanning international borders. That was exactly the point. A classic, sinister diversion tactic. Send local authorities on a frantic wild goose chase. Stretch their manpower thin. Make pinpointing a drop practically impossible. Create the haunting illusion she could be anywhere. Experts weren't buying it. According to official reports, evidence suggested the perpetrator was local to Tucson, hiding within 50 miles. That 12-hour buffer was pure misdirection. It exposed a systemic failure, deliberately forcing detectives to look vast when they needed to look microscopic. Actual abductors never grant a family 12 agonizing hours. They demand the payout instantly. They want to dump their captive quickly. They aim to slash risk and vanish. This 12-hour window achieved the opposite. It manufactured artificial panic while simultaneously ballooning the search grid. It was psychological warfare, but nobody knew yet how well it was working. The ticking clock aggressively pressured her loved ones into an emotional gamble over rational calculation. 12 hours leave zero room to investigate, verify proof of life, or negotiate. It tragically cornered them into acting on blind faith. Ignoring every glaring red flag and pushing back against seasoned advice, the desperate family paid. They did it not because forensic science supported it. Hope simply overpowers logic. That profound vulnerability set the stage for a devastating twist. Then came day 6, shattering the narrative. Authorities descended on the property geared in hazmat suits and heavy excavation machinery. They roped off the yard and started tearing into the septic tank. Let that chilling reality settle into your bones. Police absolutely do not dredge residential waste systems during active hostage negotiations. You never hunt for a living captive underground. You never dig through raw sewage when actively mounting a rescue. You only authorize that search when hunting for a dumped corpse. Septic tanks remain strictly the domain of grim homicide investigations. Detectives crack them open when evidence suggests a killer flushed their sins. They are drained only when a frantic rescue officially turns into a dark recovery. So, what horrifying secrets hide inside a residential septic tank? Blood-soaked garments, rusted knives and small firearms, bleach, along with trace DNA evidence, human tissue, and synthetic fibers from the actual restraints. Killers mistakenly believe flushing the proof erases it forever. It doesn't. Those concrete vaults swallow and hold on to every secret. They never flow straight to municipal plants. They are closed vaults. Forensic dive teams can fish out damning clues months later. Excavating that specific underground tank signaled a terrifying pivot. Law enforcement officially believed Sweet Nancy never walked out alive. Authorities concluded the gruesome evidence was hastily buried on the property. Everyone knew deep down this was no longer a ransom. It was a full-blown homicide investigation. The grim excavation made instant headlines. Choppers broadcasted investigators in stark white suits, methodically dredging up biohazard bags for state lab analysis. The imagery felt brutally stark, a death sentence. It was a living nightmare visualized. The forensic sludge results remain sealed, but the sheer fact they dug there teases a much darker truth. If they successfully uncovered hard evidence, trace DNA, microscopic blood, or synthetic fibers, warrants and arrests could follow within weeks. If that sludge comes up empty, the cold case drags on, leaving a gaping open wound. If you demand justice for wrongful convictions and cold cases, and want real-time updates as the killer is hunted, hit subscribe. This twisted saga is far from finished. Now, let's discuss Bitcoin. The crypto demand actually reveals a lot more than you realize. Modern monsters absolutely love Bitcoin. It operates in the shadows. It transfers in seconds. Executed correctly, it becomes practically invisible. Here is the sinister mechanics. Crypto transactions are permanently logged on a public ledger known as the blockchain. Anyone online can monitor the drop address, amount, and precise timestamp, but the digital wallet is never legally tethered to a human name. It acts merely as a ghostly string of characters. That creates phantom anonymity. To make the digital ransom completely bulletproof, criminals utilize a dark web tactic known as tumbling. They launder the extorted funds through hundreds of proxy wallets, violently churning the cash to shatter the forensic trail. By the time the money hits the mastermind's pocket, reversing the digital breadcrumbs is basically a mathematical impossibility. That is exactly why serial killers demand crypto over unmarked bills. But that was their first mistake. The extortion note blatantly listed a specific wallet address. That digital wallet sits right out in the open. Any armchair detective can watch the stolen balance sit there in real time, waiting. The digital ledger showed zero. What did that mean? Evidence suggested three distinct paths. First, her family held out, strictly following professional advice. They waited for a proof of life that might never surface. Scenario 2. The family paid in secret, tightly controlling the narrative. They kept it quiet. Instead, they partnered with law enforcement to aggressively track the funds. Scenario 3. The captors swapped out the wallet. Realizing outsiders watched, they privately handed over a completely fresh digital address. But that third theory fell completely apart. If the captors communicated directly, they would offer proof of life. They would negotiate, build crucial trust. None of that happened. That left detectives with two chilling paths. Either her family refused the demand, or they already paid and nobody knew it. O'Shea stood firm on his guidance. Do not pay that ransom. His logic was brutally simple. If Nancy breathed, they would prove it. They would negotiate. They would absolutely guarantee that payout could happen. If Nancy was already dead, paying up only funded her killers. It directly rewarded the monsters who destroyed her beautiful family. If this was a hoax, paying validated the con artist. It practically invited future scams, targeting other innocent families in crisis. Whatever the horrific truth, payment guaranteed absolutely nothing. But that was the agonizing, impossible nightmare currently trapping her innocent family. Logic screamed to hold back. Experts agreed. Evidence said no. But what if a chance existed? What if that 1% was real? What if refusing payment meant destroying their only chance to finally bring Nancy home? $6 million was immense wealth, but Nancy was absolutely priceless. The FBI stalked the Bitcoin wallet. If cash moved, agents would fiercely trace it through the tumbling process. They would hunt down the hidden recipient. They would follow the money. By then, time might run out. Let us dissect exactly what unfolded, because this timeline revealed dark, crucial patterns. Nancy Guthrie was reported completely missing from her quiet Tucson home. The chaotic scene proved this was poorly planned. Blood stained the interior, not enough for a fatal wound, but plenty to confirm a violent struggle. Outside the home, a security floodlight lay completely shattered. Broken glass scattered everywhere, hinting at a vicious fight. But nobody knew yet. The chilling twist? The doors showed absolutely zero signs of a breach. No shattered locks. No kicked-in door frames. Either the predator possessed a key, or Nancy tragically let them inside. Her pill bottles sat abandoned on the counter, completely untouched. Heart pills, blood pressure prescriptions, meds an 84-year-old desperately needed to survive. Detectives immediately treated this horrific case as an abduction. Sheriff Chris Nanos and the FBI were finally alerted. The lethal countdown began. The ransom note arrived, but it bypassed the family, skipped Savannah, and completely ignored law enforcement. It went straight to TMZ and KVOA, a local Tucson television network. The message slipped through flawed public tip portals meant for whistleblowers. It left zero metadata, no IP address, no way to track it, no way to respond. The demand stated $6 million in Bitcoin. They even provided a highly specific digital address. The note guaranteed Nancy would return safely within 12 hours of payment. The hard deadline struck at exactly 5 p.m. on a chosen date. The letter was grammatically flawless, highly articulate, chillingly calm. It hardly sounded like someone fleeing a terrifying, violent crime scene. And it featured one deeply unsettling word: celebrate. Her grieving family was completely blindsided. They discovered the ransom demand through the press, not the captors. TMZ broke it. Savannah Guthrie then delivered a gut-wrenching public statement. She remained composed, but the horrific strain showed. She was a hardened journalist. She was wired to ask tough questions, never to answer them. She always maintained absolute control. Now, she openly begged for proof of life. She offered to pay the massive ransom. She begged the captors to reach out. She swore the family would do anything to bring Nancy home. Then she dropped a word that stopped detectives cold: celebrate. The exact same word from the anonymous ransom note. The very same unusual, chilling choice. In a painful statement about a vanished mother and a shattered family, Savannah claimed they wanted to celebrate her return. Was it a bizarre coincidence? Did the kidnapper mimic the family language? Or was someone close to the victim secretly involved? Detectives took immediate note. 5 p.m. hit. The deadline passed in silence. That Bitcoin wallet, fully exposed on the blockchain, sat strictly at zero. No payment ever moved, or at least, absolutely nothing the watchful public could ever see. No contact from the captors, no follow-up note, no proof of life, no frantic negotiation, just suffocating silence. In legitimate abductions, missed deadlines always trigger communication. Kidnappers extend the clock. They pivot and renegotiate. They deliver proof of life to rebuild a twisted trust. They never just evaporate into thin air. But that was exactly what unfolded here. The family sat waiting, desperately begging into a black void. Former hostage negotiator Daniel Oshia took his chilling analysis public. He was brutally blunt. This was no authentic kidnapping. Former FBI agent Ken Gray deeply echoed that exact horrifying assessment. But that was the first mistake. Zero proof of life. A public ransom. Evidence suggested this wasn't a real abduction. Nobody knew the truth yet. CNN's Josh Campbell highlighted these glaring red flags on national television. The media tore the narrative apart. Her family clung to hope. Then, investigators arrived in hazmat gear. Yellow tape choked the perimeter. Choppers captured a chilling sight. They were targeting the septic tank. The world grasped what cops already knew. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a recovery. You don't breach a septic system to save a life. Detectives crack that concrete to find destroyed evidence. They dig when they know the victim is dead. White-suited technicians draining raw sewage in Nancy's backyard became the sickening visual of the investigation. Authorities locked down the preliminary findings immediately. The classification quietly shifted to homicide. The FBI pivoted from negotiations to forensics. Who actually knew this beloved 84-year-old matriarch? Who harbored a lethal motive? The ransom looked like a calculated cover-up. Someone was buying time. Security experts begged the grieving family not to pay. The family refused to listen. They'd surrender everything for a 1% chance Nancy was breathing. She'd been gone for 8 agonizing days. At 84 years old, time was out. Zero proof of life existed. The Bitcoin wallet sat empty. The phantom kidnappers vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, the gruesome septic samples rushed to the state lab. Forensic teams worked tirelessly. The investigation churned forward, leaving a devastated family waiting in the dark. Then, a much darker theory surfaced involving Jeffrey Epstein. The timing alone was a glaring red flag. Nancy vanished exactly when previously sealed Epstein court documents dropped into the public domain. These records unmasked powerful predators. Network journalists were tearing into the files relentlessly. Nancy's daughter, Savannah Guthrie, is a titan at NBC. She's grilled presidents and covered national crises. She was the exact caliber of anchor to lead the Epstein coverage. The terrifying theory took root. Was this a plot to force her off the air? A warning meant to bury her investigation forever? Former intelligence operative Daniel O'Shea brought this wild possibility to light. He admitted it was purely speculative. He didn't buy it as the core motive, but couldn't rule it out. That was their first mistake. First, the logistics are a nightmare. The corrupt system has far more subtle ways to silence a reporter. Anonymous threats or legal action are easier. Snatching an 84-year-old woman is an absurdly high-risk play. Second, those notorious files were already public before Nancy vanished. The catastrophic damage to the elite was done. Sidelining a single journalist wouldn't stuff those revelations back into the vault. The truth was out. Third, the darkest monsters are painfully ordinary. A botched home invasion, bitter vendetta, or opportunistic greed. The Epstein angle made for thrilling television, but evidence suggested a far more intimate, terrifying reality. Cold case data shows it's rarely a roaming serial killer. It points to family, a caregiver, or the handyman. Ignoring that leads to wrongful convictions. They needed someone harboring a festering personal motive. The statistics prove this. Over 90% of these nightmare abductions are perpetrated by a familiar face, close relatives or acquaintances, people armed with easy access. The random stranger snatching an elderly woman off the street is a myth. While internet sleuths chased billionaire ghosts, seasoned detectives hunted closer to home. The bizarre ransom note. The deafening lack of proof of life. The septic excavation screamed of an ultra-local homicide masked by fiction. What if the shattered family defied the experts and wired the $6 million? Cyber units would hunt that Bitcoin across the dark web. They'd track every byte through the crypto tumbling process. They would hunt the phantom recipient down. If Nancy never came home, the facade would completely shatter. The multi-million-dollar ransom would finally be exposed for what it was, a deadly smokescreen. Detectives would pivot to the real question. Who authored that twisted note? O'Shea's warning would be validated completely. The ransom was a ghost. If the septic search dredged up hidden DNA, washed blood, or weapons, it's murder. Advanced forensic genetics would extract the microscopic story left behind. The killer's DNA is waiting. If that genetic ghost triggered a database match, tactical teams would be kicking down doors within weeks. If it didn't, they'd start swabbing everyone with a key. Justice demands answers. Drop your theories below. Tangible proof rarely lies. But if that septic tank holds nothing, and no further clues surface, this investigation might freeze. No remains, no forensic traces, no eyewitnesses. Cases like this turn to ice. They are never closed. They just wait. Waiting for DNA advances. Waiting for a guilty conscience. Waiting for a slip-up. Cold cases utterly destroy families. No resolution, no justice, just an agonizing wait. But nobody knew yet that detectives were targeting 6 key areas. 1. Victimology. Who exactly was Nancy Guthrie? Who did she see? Who held her house keys? Was it a serial killer, money, spite, or revenge? 2. Financial records. Who profited when she vanished into thin air? Were there massive life insurance payouts, bitter inheritance wars, or hidden debts? 3. The digital eyes. According to records, police want Ring cameras and traffic lenses. Detectives are scrubbing video from the days before she vanished, hunting for an out-of-place vehicle or a shadow lingering on her block. 4. Forensics. Blood traces, latent prints, dirt, and DNA profiles. Evidence suggested every single drop is currently under a scope. 5. Digital tracking. The ransom letter arrived anonymously, but even dark web forms leave a digital trace. Hidden IP addresses, device routing. Authorities are now pushing TMZ and KVOA for their submission logs. 6. The septic tank. Whatever secrets hid inside that dark water will completely dictate the next terrifying move. If you reside in Tucson, if you walked her streets in the days before the vanishing, the authorities desperately need to hear your voice immediately. Did you spot anything chilling? A strange car idling nearby? A stranger watching her home? Odd noises in the dead of night? Pull your doorbell archives right now. Review your security feeds. The smallest detail. Something you brushed off as nothing could be the exact thread that unravels this case. You can remain a ghost. You never have to reveal your identity. You just need to whisper what you saw. One memory could break this wide open. But let us look closely at the victims left behind. Analyzing clinical clues is the easy part. It is terrifying to fathom the living hell Savannah Guthrie and her loved ones are enduring. Savannah is a household name. She has grilled presidents. She has reported on brutal wars and massive political scandals. She is used to absolute control. She demands the truth. She gets the scoop. But that was her first mistake. She cannot spin the narrative. She cannot bargain with monsters. She cannot protect her own. She is screaming into a void for her mother's life. And the void is silent. Daniel Oya framed it bluntly. You just sit in the quiet and hope. That is torture. Hope without hard evidence is a visceral agony. It is the most devastating limbo. You cannot mourn because the body is missing. You cannot take a single step forward because you are paralyzed, waiting for a dreaded phone call that might never come. Her family lacks any proof of life. The abductors refuse to show their hand. No negotiations. That ransom note went to the press, bypassing them entirely. No secret back channels, no dialogue, no way out of the dark. Paying the blood money guarantees nothing. Profilers tell them to hold off. Cold logic demands that they just wait. But a daughter's heart whispers, what if there is a chance? Then comes the media circus. Every painful secret is bleeding into the headlines. Every clue is dissected on primetime. Armchair sleuths are risking a wrongful conviction online. A family's raw trauma is put on a stage for the masses. Privacy is a myth. Savannah begged for mercy, and the internet ripped her words apart. They scrutinized why she used the word celebrate. They even dared to suggest she was the killer. They weaponized her grief for clicks. That is the true price of fame. A systemic failure where tragedy is mere entertainment. The Guthrie family is owed the truth. They desperately need to know Nancy's fate. They deserve the name of the monster responsible. They deserve cold justice. They deserve an end to the terror, a chance to mourn, and the right to finally heal. Even if the future means carrying a ghost forever, they deserve peace. The quiet space to survive this nightmare without flashing cameras. Nancy Guthrie must be found, dead or alive. She needs to be carried home. If her life was stolen, she is owed human dignity. She deserves to rest in peace. She is a mother, not just a tragic headline. She deserves absolute justice. Whoever stalked her, whoever stole her away, whoever typed that ransom note will face the light. Her legacy must be handled with deep reverence, not exploited, not cheapened by true crime vultures, not reduced to clickbait. But this central mystery echoes a dark truth. No human being should ever survive this. The endless doubt, the cruel hoaxes, the profound psychological torture of a ransom. Every single stolen life demands this exact level of fury. Not just the victims with famous bloodlines, not just those making headlines. Every vanished soul deserves to be found. Every broken family is owed the truth. A victim's status should never dictate the urgency of a manhunt. Yet, systemic failure runs deep, letting media hype drive the badge, while forgotten names gather dust. Nancy Guthrie became a headline overnight, but solely due to her daughter's massive celebrity shadow. Meanwhile, thousands of ordinary families endure that exact hellscape in silence. They bleed in the dark, desperate for justice. The public consumed carefully curated press conferences. Behind closed doors, however, detectives were quietly launching a six-pronged war. Forensics tore through the New York residence with a fine-tooth comb. Then, they found the blood. Questions mounted instantly. Did the splatter indicate a lethal blow, or was it merely a warning shot? Technicians dusted the splintered door frames in the busted floodlight. They prayed for a stray fingerprint from a complete stranger. Skin cells, microscopic fibers, a single hair. Methodical science was their only weapon to unmask the predator. Investigators swept for the smallest anomaly. They needed the house to whisper its violent secrets, but the walls stayed quiet. The kidnapper felt untouchable, utilizing public tip portals, but that was the first mistake. Virtual private networks still cast digital shadows. Cyber specialists began hunting the invisible trail. They tracked unique device signatures, browser configurations, and hidden network origins. Every keystroke carries a timestamp. Authorities desperately cross-referenced those exact seconds with the physical invasion timeline, seeking a slip-up. Federal agents strong-armed submission logs from outlets like TMZ and KVOA. They ripped apart the metadata, hunting the suspect's rhythm. Arrogant taunts always leave a trail of breadcrumbs, yet the central mystery remained buried. Who exactly was Nancy Guthrie? Profilers tore her life apart piece by piece. They scrutinized her inner circle, trusted confidants, and anyone holding a key. Delivery drivers, caretakers, and random handymen. Anyone crossing her threshold before she vanished fell under the microscope. Detectives hunted for hidden fractures. Were there sudden feuds or broken routines before the storm? Over 90% of abducted victims stare into the eyes of someone they know. The manhunt started inside and bled outward. Detectives followed the paper trail of greed. Did someone stand to inherit a fortune or erase a crippling debt? Search warrants blew open her banking history, locked trusts, and private estate documents. Blood money remains the oldest motive for murder. Anyone standing to cash in instantly caught a massive target. Task force members hit the pavement hard. They ripped security footage from surrounding neighborhood doorbells. They requisitioned data from residential lenses, local businesses, and intersection monitors. Analysts scrubbed days of tape. They watched specifically for shadows and vehicles that simply didn't belong. It only takes a single grainy frame. One partial license plate is enough to bring the entire house of cards down. Technicians dredged the septic tank for horrific secrets. Any biological material pulled from that muck immediately hit the national database. As evidence suggested a brutal struggle, every crimson stain was typed. Shredded fabric fragments were meticulously analyzed against criminal profiles. Microscopic fragments were about to pivot a frantic rescue into a cold-blooded murder trial, but nobody knew yet. More than 8 agonizing days had passed since the victim took her critical medication. At 84 years old, her body was a ticking bomb. You cannot survive without those vital prescriptions. The cruel reality of time suffocated the precinct. Hardened experts were already whispering the word recovery, abandoning the rescue fantasy. Yet, defying all logic, impossible survivals happen. History holds rare files where victims emerged from the dark weeks later. It was a lottery ticket's chance. Detectives clung to that desperate sliver of light, even while digging the figurative grave. As local reporting cited, Sheriff Chris Nanos spearheaded the ground game. Meanwhile, the Bureau unleashed crushing federal resources. This monstrous task force blurred the lines between local grit and national intelligence. It was their ultimate gambit against an invisible enemy. They absolutely refused to let the trail freeze. But we have to ask, do you genuinely believe she is breathing right now? Are we staring at a masterfully staged grift or a targeted hit? Was she grabbed by a faceless monster or betrayed by a friend? What chilling detail keeps you awake? The arrogant TMZ letter, the sick use of the word celebrate, or the gruesome septic tank dig? Drop your theories below, but tread carefully. A fractured family is bleeding out in real time reading these exact words. We refuse to let this tragedy degrade into cheap internet theater. Stick to the hard evidence and honor the hunt. Check the baseless rumors at the door. No blaming grieving relatives, no grotesque fantasies, just surgical and respectful deduction. If there is another forgotten cold case gathering dust that you want ripped open, drop the name down below. Our mission drags shadowed atrocities into the brutal light, relentlessly demanding accountability for the lost. Hit that subscribe button immediately. Ring the alert bell so you never miss a timeline break. Thank you for standing with a movement that refuses to let victims fade into oblivion. Let this reality sink into your bones. The nightmare could kick your door down next. She was 84. Living within an upscale community, she possessed immense wealth, a famous television anchor child, and highly proactive relatives. But unseen shadows strongly disagreed. Still, an unseen predator breached her sanctuary. Nobody remains perfectly shielded. Every person stays completely vulnerable to horrifying brutality. Believing monsters ignore your doorstep is a soothing delusion we blindly accept until the glass shatters. Therefore, we must prioritize rigorous defensive measures, secure every single entry point, because daylight never stops a stalker. Evidence suggested effortless access invites horrific intrusions. Mount surveillance cameras immediately. Digital sentinels harden perimeters, but nobody knew when the watchful lenses would fail. Continuously monitor aging relatives. Frequent conversations and physical check-ins remain absolutely vital, because isolation kills. Guarantee someone instant. Neighborhood vigilance fortifies against predators. Identifying outsiders creeping through shadows triggers rapid police intervention, but the true monsters often hide in plain sight. Always believe your primal intuition. When an environment turns eerie, a predator is watching. Never rationalize away the rising dread. Contact law enforcement immediately. Voicing your dark suspicions is an absolute survival mandate. That swift action prevents devastating funerals. An unfamiliar idling truck, a shadowy figure pacing the sidewalk. Bizarre movements near an adjacent residence demand scrutiny. Never wait for another bystander's intervention. That was the first mistake before she vanished completely. Each abducted individual demands a relentless search before the trail freezes. Systemic failures constantly ignore marginalized victims. Nancy's disappearance dominates headlines solely due to her television star child's celebrity, while a ruthless killer freely roams. Meanwhile, countless shattered households are currently enduring this exact terrifying hellscape, entirely devoid of media, lacking financial backing, and stripped of optimism. Those forgotten souls demand courtroom vindication. We broadcast these ignored mysteries to expose buried secrets. Our mission memorializes the fallen and actively demands transparency. We are desperately praying for a miracle before Nancy's time expires. We fiercely hope her devastated relatives uncover the chilling truth. Simultaneously, we are bracing for a profoundly grim discovery. Regardless of the horrific outcome, Nancy demands a brutal, uncompromising legal reckoning. Her grieving loved ones require definitive finality, and the perpetrator warrants severe punishment. The sinister trail remains fresh. Detectives are currently scouring fresh DNA evidence. We will continuously share terrifying breakthroughs. To track every single forensic development, join our channel and activate alerts immediately. A massive twist is coming, because this nightmare has barely begun. Please drop your requested unsolved mysteries down below. Our dedicated team exists to scrutinize botched investigations, rigorously examine forensic data, and immortalize the tragic casualties whose killers are still walking completely free. We genuinely appreciate your viewership and morbid curiosity. We deeply value your participation within a vigilant network that fiercely advocates for locating vanished individuals. Our collective purpose illuminates intentionally buried investigations, respectfully humanizes the deceased, and aggressively pursues retribution before predators strike again. Maintain your situational awareness, remain analytical, and rigorously interrogate everything. Until the next nightmare. The tragic disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie shatters a comforting illusion we all desperately want to believe, that quiet, upscale neighborhoods and loving families create an impenetrable shield against evil. This waking nightmare proves that no one is perfectly insulated from the darkest corners of humanity. We cannot afford the soothing delusion that monsters ignore your doorstep until the glass literally shatters. The profound lesson here is the critical duty we owe to the vulnerable. We must actively protect our aging relatives through frequent conversations and physical check-ins, because isolation kills. We must trust our primal intuition. When an environment turns eerie, never rationalize away the rising dread. Neighborhood vigilance is our first line of defense against predators. Pay attention to that unfamiliar idling truck or the shadowy figure pacing the sidewalk. Ultimately, every vanished soul, regardless of their fame or status, deserves relentless justice. Thank you for standing with Crime Files with Liam as our mission drags shadowed atrocities into the brutal light. We deeply value your participation in this vigilant network. If you demand justice for the lost, please hit that subscribe button, drop your theories in the comments below, and ring the alert bell so you never miss a timeline break. We could not do this without you.